Chapter 24. The Model. The smoke really was smoky. Open fires dotted the valley, surrounded by small groups of people. The scents of wood smoke and cooking drifted up to Tally, smells that made her think of camping and outdoor parties. In addition to the smoke, there was a morning mist in the air, a white finger creeping down into the valley from a bank of cloud nestled against the mountain higher up. A few solar panels glimmered feebly, gathering what sun was reflected from the mist. Garden plots were planted in random spots between the buildings. 20 or so one-story structures made from long planks of wood. There was wood everywhere, in fences, in cooking spits, laid down in walkways over muddy patches, and in big stacks of fires. Tally wondered where they had found so much wood. Then she saw the stumps at the edges of the settlement, and gasped. "Trees!" she whispered in horror. "You cut down trees!" Shay squeezed her hand. "Only in this valley. It seems weird at first, but it's the way the pre-rusties live too, you know? And we're planting more on the other side of the mountain, pushing into the orchids." "Okay," Tally said doubtfully. She saw a team of Uglies moving a felled tree, pushing it along with a pair of hoverboards. "There's a grid?" Shay nodded happily. "Just in places. We pulled up a bunch of metal from a railroad, like the track you came out the coast on. We've laid out a few hover paths through the smoke, and eventually we'll do the whole valley. I've been working on that project. We bury a piece of junk every few paces. Like everything here, it's tougher than you'd think. You wouldn't believe how much a knapsack full of steel weighs." David and the others were already headed down, gliding single file between 2 rows of rocks painted a glowing orange. "That's the hover path?" Tally asked. "Yeah, come on. I'll take you down to the library. You've got to meet the boss." The boss wasn't really in charge here, Shay explained. He just acted like it, especially to newbies. But he was in command of the library, the largest of the buildings in the settlement's central square. The familiar scent of dusty books overwhelmed Tally at the library door, and as she looked around, she realized that the books were pretty much all the library had. No big air screen, not even private work screens. Just mismatched desks and chairs and rows of bookshelves. Shay led her to the center of it all, where the round kiosk was inhabited by a small figure talking on an old-fashioned handphone. As they drew closer, Tally felt her heart starting to pound. She had been dreading what she was about to see. The boss was an old Ugly. Tally had spotted a few from a distance on the way in, but had managed to turn her eyes away. But here was the wrinkled, veined, discolored, shuffling, horrific truth, right before her eyes. His milky eyes glared at them as he berated whoever was on the phone, in a rattling voice and waving one claw at them to go away. Shay giggled and pulled her toward the shelves. "He'll get to us eventually. There's something I want to show you first." That poor man. The boss? Pretty wild, huh? He's like 40. Wait until you talk to him. Tally swallowed, trying to erase the image of his sagging features from her mind. These people were insane to tolerate that, to want it. But his face, Tally said. "That's nothing. Check these out." Shay sat her down at a table, turning to a shelf and pulling out a handful of volumes and protective covers. She plonked them in front of Tally. "Books on paper? What about them?" "Not books. They're called magazines," Shay said. She opened one and pointed. Its strangely glossy pages were covered with pictures of people. Uglies. Tally's eyes widened as Shay turned the pages, pointing and giggling. She had never seen so many wildly different faces before. Mouths and eyes and noses of every imaginable shape, all combined insanely on people of every age. And the bodies. Some were grotesquely fat, or weirdly over-muscled, or uncomfortably thin. And most of all of them had wrong, ugly proportions. But instead of being ashamed of all their deformities, the people were laughing, and kissing and posing, as if all the pictures had been taken at some huge party. "Who are these freaks?" "They're not freaks," Shay said. "The weird thing is, these are famous people." "Famous for what? Being hideous?" "No. They're sports stars, actors, artists. The men with stringy hair are musicians, I think. And the really ugly ones are politicians. And someone told me the fatties are mostly comedians." "That's funny, as in strange," Tally said. "So this is what people look like before the first pretty? How could anyone stand to open their eyes?" "Yeah, it's scary at first. But the weird thing is, if you keep looking at them, you kind of get used to it." Shay turned to a full-page picture of a woman wearing only some kind of form-fitting underwear, like a lacy swimsuit. "What the?" Tally said. Yeah, the woman looked like she was starving. Her ribs thrusting out from her sides, her legs so thin that Tally wondered how they didn't snap under her weight. Her elbows and pelvic bones looked sharp as needles. But there she was, smiling and proudly bearing her body, as if she just had the operation and didn't realize they'd sucked out way too much fat. The funny thing was, her face was closer to being pretty than any of the rest. She had big eyes, smooth skin, and a small nose. But her cheekbones were too tight, the skull practically visible beneath her flesh. What on earth is she? A model. Which is what? Kind of like a professional pretty. I guess when everyone else is ugly, being pretty is sort of like your job. And she's unaware because... Tally began, and then a memory flashed into her mind. She's got that disease. The one the teachers always told us about? Probably. I always thought they made that up to scare us. Back in the days before the operation, Tally remembered, a lot of people, especially young girls, became so ashamed of being fat they stopped eating. They'd lose weight too quickly, and some would get stuck and would keep losing weight until they wound up like this model. Some even died, they said at school. That was one of the reasons they'd come for the operation. No one got the disease anymore, since everyone knew at 16 they'd turn beautiful. In fact, most people pigged out just before they turned, knowing them to all be sucked away. Tally stared at the picture and shivered. Why go back to this? Spooky, huh? Shay turned away. I'll see if the boss is ready yet. Before she disappeared around the corner, Tally noticed how skinny Shay was. Not disease skinny, just ugly skinny. She'd never eaten much. Tally wondered if here in the smoke, Shay's undereating would get worse and worse, until she wound up starving herself. Tally fingered the pendant. This is her chance. She might as well get it over with now. These people had forgotten what the old world was really like. Sure, they were having a great time camping out and playing hide-and-seek, and living here was a great trick on the cities. But somehow they'd forgotten the Rusties had been insane, almost destroying the world in a million different ways. This starving almost pretty was only one of them. Why go back to that? They were already cutting down trees here. Tally popped open the heart pendant, looking down at the little glowing aperture where the laser waited to read her eye print. She brought it closer, her hand shaking. It was foolish to wait. It would only get harder. And what choice did she have? Tally, he's almost... Tally snapped closed the pendant and shoved it into her shirt. Shay smiled shyly. I noticed that before. What gives? What do you mean? Oh, come on. You never wore anything like that before. I leave you alone for 2 weeks, and you get all romantic? Tally swallowed, looking down at the silver heart. I mean, it's a really nice necklace. Beautiful. But who gave it to you, Tally? Tally found she couldn't bring herself to lie. Someone. Just someone. Shay rolled her eyes. Last-minute fling, huh? I always thought you were saving yourself for Paris. It's not like that. It's... Why not tell her? Tally asked herself. She'd figured out when the specials came roaring in anyway. If she knew, she could at least prepare herself before this fantasy world came tumbling down. I have to tell you something. Sure. My coming here is kind of... The thing is... When I get to my...
What are you doing?
Tally jumped at the craggy voice. It was like an old, broken version of Dr. Cable's. A rusty razor blade drawn across her nerves.
Those magazines are over 3 centuries old, and you're not wearing gloves.
The boss shuffled over to where Tally was sitting, producing white cotton gloves and pulling them on. He reached around her to close the one she was reading.
Your fingers are covered in very nasty acids, young lady. You'll rot away at these magazines if you're not careful. Before you go nosing around in the collection, you come to me.
Sorry, boss, Shay said. My fault.
I don't doubt it,
he snapped, reshoving the magazines with elegant, careful movements at odds with his harsh words.
Now, young lady, I suppose you're here for a work assignment?
Work? Tally said. They both looked down at her puzzled expressions, and Shay burst into laughter.